So the book you suggested we discuss was Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Where were you in your journey when you came across this book?
I was at a point in my life, I think, where it really meant a lot to me to mean what I say and not to do it in a way that was obviously manipulative. You've got to build a relationship.
Yeah.
And that was the difference. You're not getting to yes, you're getting to understand. Negotiations shouldn't even proceed if you aren't clear that there is overlap. If you are going to split the difference, it's typically because you're just being lazy. Yeah. I'm not explaining to you what the real value is of my service, for example. Maybe you aren't explaining to me your options.
Welcome to the Non-Fiction Book Club. I'm your host, John Bradshaw. We've got a great show for you today. A reminder to sign up to our newsletter at www.nonfictionbookclub.co.za to always be the first to hear about book reviews, interviews like this, and get great discounts on the books we cover. A big thank you to Innate, our season sponsor. Innate is the platform for financial advisors who want to manage their client portfolios efficiently and effectively and spend more time helping their clients make great decisions and less time on paperwork. You can check out innate.co.za if you want to find out more. And now for our show. It is my great pleasure to welcome Adrian Dommisse today on the show. Adrian Dommisse is the founder of Dommisse Attorneys. He's a lawyer, but he's the kind of lawyer who you regularly find popping up in books by startup founders, and his name often comes up in startups talking about how they've managed to get their IP in the right place, how they've managed to get well-structured agreements with investors. He is an ecosystem builder. He's involved in the South African Startup Act. He's been instrumental in a whole number of exits, Get Smarter, SnapScan, Yuppie Chef, Woo Themes, Offers In, and a bunch more. He's an advisor to the University of Stellenbosch, the University of Cape Town. But I was so keen to have him on here because you're such a thoughtful person whenever we've talked about anything. You're curious, you're applying what you learned, and you had a great book that you wanted to discuss. So wonderful to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, John. Yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
So the book you suggested we discuss was Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Absolutely fantastic book. Where were you in your journey when you came across this book?
So that was contextually fascinating because we were a few months out of closing one of the biggest exits I'd ever worked on. It was Yuppie Chef's acquisition by the Mr. Price Group. And, the technicalities of negotiation can be, frankly, quite intimidating and off-putting, to be honest. And what I loved about this book was that it encapsulated why I've always been put off negotiation. Negotiation, especially in a legal world, is about building together an unassailable set of facts, shouting them at the opponent until they can't respond, and then bowing them into submission and agreeing to your case. And that's very much the experience I'd had with a lot of other lawyers before entering the world as a startup lawyer. And then you join the startup world, and it's just an amazingly collaborative world. It's generally very, very wholesome. And it's really fundamentally about, I think, the old catchwords of authenticity and integrity, because you really have to build a relationship. To be financially successful, you've got to build a relationship with your client for a long time, because you don't charge them a lot of fees until the one big day. But you've got to have that long-term relationship. And that resonated with me, having left two of the largest law firms in Africa after a season in the UK. And where we're at is it always felt a little bit disadvantaged in my negotiation style. I can speak well like anybody who wants to learn to speak well, but what you're actually saying is quite important and how you say it.
Yes.
And I was at a point in my life, I think, where it really meant a lot to me to be to mean what I say and not to do it in a way that was obviously manipulative. And that's how I was got into this book, which no doubt we talk about the message, and I think that message was powerful in that regard.
Yeah. And so you talk about the traditional style, rational arguments, maybe manipulative, maybe inauthentic. Can you contrast a little bit the never split the difference ethos as opposed to that?
So the book talks about the old conventional style of negotiation, which, by the way, we might as well get into the snippets of the book while we go along.
Yeah.
Which was defined by this amazing book, perfectly Americanly titled, called getting to yes.
Getting to yes.
Get
Classic.
to yes. Okay. And it is exactly how it sounds. You put together this unassailable set of facts, you put them to your opponent, they can't deny them, they've got to say yes and respond. And fascinatingly, in the context of this book, the FBI was using this technique and had many opportunities to do so. They had a scourge of hijackings and hostage-taking situations, like hundreds of them at one point, and I think in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
When I say hundreds, and they had 5 airplanes hijacked in 3 days at one point. Now, when last did you ever hear of an airplane being hijacked? And this is all the time. So they were using these negotiation tactics with completely disastrous results. Because they would set up these unassailable facts and then people would just, freak out and people start dying. And they realized that it took them a long time, but it took them a few terrible disasters, which they go into in gory details, which is actually part of the attraction of the book. These stories.
The stories.
Yeah, real life stories of
and not all successes. So
no, many failures.
Balance, yeah.
And the learnings were from failures, like they are in life, right? And they realized that the critical thing they finally realized that they in hostage negotiations, as in many times, you're actually engaging with somebody who's emotionally all over the place. They're scared, they're panicked, they're angry maybe, they're regretful about their actions, and they had to understand the person's emotional state. And to understand their state, you've got to build a relationship.
Yeah.
And that was the difference. You're not getting to yes, you're getting to understand.
And what I love about that is it's not pretending to build a relationship.
Yeah.
It's actually building a relationship. It's not, it's actually trying to understand them. It's actually listening, which I found incredible.
That's the message I took away, and that's what I chose to take away from the book. I think you can dive quite deeply in the book. There's a lot of, shall we say, lots of technical psychology going on in the book, which might be, a bit more than that. It might be sort of, I think they talk about managing the emotions and behavior of your opponent, so to speak, which is I don't really feel completely comfortable with, but the principle actually is exactly right. The takeaways I took.
Yeah, I feel like whenever there's a school of negotiating advice or techniques or anything like that, I feel like some of them you would really want a person you're negotiating with to have read it so that you could have a good negotiation.
Yeah.
Other ones you come across and say, well, I wouldn't want anyone I'm negotiating with to have read it. This feels like it's some and some, actually. There's some bits in here about listening really well, mirroring, playing back, having that empathy that you would want someone you're negotiating with to have. The other bits where maybe not so much, like the description of the other person as the opponent.
Yeah.
You're still trying to win. You're still trying to maximize your advantage out of that. Okay, so you read this, I think that's about 4 years ago, 4 or 5, 5 years ago. Which parts of the book have you felt like, hey, these are that I've really used and incorporated in?
Yeah, so the parts of the book that I realized I could use were the easiest parts. I realized that the truth of this book is that negotiation is very much about listening. And that was awesome for me. I'll go through some of the techniques. So the first thing he says is slow everything down. And I love the concept of slow everything down. He even says to the point, speak like the midnight FM DJ.
Yeah, late night DJ voice.
The late night DJ voice. And I also love this point because it slows me down. And it also gives a strong message to the person listening to you. And I've used this in many occasions, and everyone relaxes. Because you don't sound like someone who's panicked, who's trying to force a message down their throat. You're suddenly talking to John about your favorite book. And this is a completely different experience. You're talking to John about your favorite book, and you must listen to the story.
Yeah.
So it comes across
completely different. Yeah.
And when you talk like that, you say different things. But you give people space to think about what you're saying. You give yourself space to listen.
Yeah.
So that was quite important. Then there's the other technique. There's mirroring. There's silence, and then there's slow speaking.
Yeah, maybe just talk a little bit about what mirroring is.
Well, before I do that, let me just say all three of these techniques, I think just the three, are fundamentally about slowing you down and learning about what the other person's saying.
Yeah.
So if we're in a emotionally heightened scenario, typically speaking, both of you are not saying what you're thinking. You're being influenced by your emotions very much so. And you normally, very often, think of how many times you've said things you regret. And these three techniques are supposed to give everybody the opportunity to speak, to feel heard. And what's amazing is when someone feels heard, they start hearing themselves.
Yeah.
And when you can hear yourself, because everything's slowed down, everything's calmer, you start to be, frankly, I think, a bit more honest with yourself. Okay, so the first approach, which I just think just tones me down and makes me enjoy engaging with people, is the midnight DJ voice. And I remember I once used this on a call with, I had to put a legal and factual position to a group of international lawyers. And they phoned and they were very clearly speaking to, in their minds, this agricultural South African lawyer.
You were under a tree somewhere running your law firm, yeah.
And I pulled this voice out in the most, because it was actually something quite fairly simple I had to say, but they all had to hear it. And because I was speaking slowly and taking each logical step at a time, it was the most wonderful call, and they could respond basically in the same tone, because there was no
so you'd set the pace.
Law school debating here. Yeah, so that was powerful, and I'd encourage everyone to do that. I think the more intellectually powerful one is the mirroring. And this is when someone's talking to you, and instead of attacking what they're saying or querying what they're saying, you really just give them a chance to say it in more detail. So normally it means just repeating what they say, repeating the core message of what they're saying. And you find that when you say that, sometimes they even ask themselves, yeah, I kind of said that. So, I want 20,000 Rand for this car because it's in perfect condition. Perfect condition.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Perfect condition. Yeah, perfect. I mean, it's been fixed up once, twice. Oh, fixed up. Yeah, a slight fender bender, and of course my daughter drove it into the bin the other day. But otherwise, it's fine. It's totally fine. I mean, it's fine. I mean, the upholstery needs fixing up, but I haven't negotiated at all.
No.
All they've done is set the facts that actually are in their mind, and most times people want to tell you.
Yeah, I find that mirroring, that was one of the main things I took out of this. Maybe a little bit like the book Time to Think as well, where it says, stop thinking about what you're going to say next, your next argument, and just listen properly. If your aim is to mirror, then it's a completely different kind of listening, because you're not thinking about what you're going to say next. The pressure is off to keep the conversation going with your next counterpoint, because your only aim is mirroring. So It's got that second order effect of really forcing you to listen well.
I've had dramatic experiences with this, with people close to me when I don't want to say use it, because I'm really just giving them that space. And having had a half an hour conversation with someone where I don't say anything new, and they stand up afterwards and hug me, say thank you for the conversation, because actually all it's done is allowed them to process their thoughts. That's not a negotiation, that's just a conversation.
Yeah, but it is, there are things in this book you should not use in your marriage. There are things in this book that are great in the marriage. I think mirroring and making sure that you understand. And the other one is getting to that's right. He talks about this idea of getting to that's right, which is better than yes, where you perfectly express back to the person what they think. So yeah, that's right.
I want to touch on that as well, but I'm a very linear thinker. So let me finish the last one. So what we're talking about, what does he call it? Active listening, hey? Is that the word? The term uses
active listening and tactical empathy.
Okay, we're going to go back to that horrible term. Active listening, very important, because no one does that. Everyone thinks active listening is talking. It's not. It's active listening. It's a beautiful principle. And then there's the last two, I think, in this section, which is silence. And if you give a silence, most people will fill it. And most people need to do that. Okay, so bundling all those together, and those actually are the most commonly used takeaways for me as a lawyer, as someone who's gauging. And it works when everyone has ultimately a desire to find common ground.
Yes.
It doesn't work when people don't.
Yes.
I once phoned a lawyer up. I did litigation, but I phoned up a litigation lawyer to help my client. The client explained the issue to me. I said, well, there's obviously common ground here. Don't worry, I'll give him a phone call, lawyer to lawyer. We'll sort this out as professionals. And I phoned up the guy and I said, Client X, this is the situation. You probably missed out that point, so I think we can find common ground. And he said, Mr. Dommisse, thank you for your little pre-rehearsed speech, but we'll see you in court. Goodbye.
Wow.
It was most astounding. And the book also does teach you how to deal with people like that.
Yes.
But there you have to engage with them on their terms. And that's a much more energetic mindset.
And it's, for me, part of that seems like where people are playing a different game, it's this idea of black swans, the unknown unknowns, that this idea that in every negotiation, just assume there are three things that you don't know that the other person knows, that if you found out would totally change the nature of the negotiation.
Yes.
And for me, that fires up my curiosity to find out what are these unknown unknowns that I don't even know to search for, that I can listen for, that I can have a second person listening for in that. I think that's incredibly powerful.
That was one of the fascinating things about the book, to get into the mind of somebody who's constantly thinking like that, being receptive or looking out for black swans. I'm not sure how different that is to just preparing heavily for every engagement and negotiation, but it's also being very aware that there could be a material new fact or issue or personality even that can change the game completely. And I find that quite intimidating.
Quite intimidating, but what I love is this idea that you're not going to hear it, so record the interactions or have a second person whose whole job is listening, right? Trying to hear the things that are between them. I think we almost never do that, even when we're multiple people in a negotiation. Give somebody the role of saying, your only job is to listen. You're not allowed to talk in this meeting, so that your 100% of your attentional capacity is focused on finding the clues and the hints that are left in the conversation.
We find
that can be really powerful.
That really is a couple of, it's just triggered some reminders of me of how critical it is as a lawyer to not be the one making notes when you're doing the engagement, because you're never aware really if you're constantly typing or thinking or writing. And for example, our policy when we interview new lawyers is for one person not to take any notes. They're the one listening and engaging. And that can be very powerful actually.
Okay. We said that there were things about that's right. Get to yes was famous. So Chris Voss makes a big statement of saying he loves no, not yes, and he loves that's right more than yes. You want to talk a little bit about those pieces, and have you found that relevant to?
I'd love to actually, because getting to yes doesn't mean you've got a yes. And this is the point he makes. And actually in my own life, quite recently had experience, so I'll talk about in a second. Just because someone said yes doesn't mean they say yes. Sometimes yes means, oh my gosh, I need to get you off the phone so I can never return your call again. Very often. I'll give you an example. A getting to yes type of conversation I had the other day. Chap posed me up, Mr. Dommisse, I see your vehicle's just lost its warranty. You're out of warranty. I didn't even know I had a warranty actually. But anyway, the point is, I thought it was secondhand to the point I didn't have one. Here's your warranty. This is going to give you all your solutions, and the cost of your warranty is going to be 15,000 Rand or 800 Rand a month. Which one are you going to choose now? I didn't have an option to say no. I didn't have an option to ask questions. I just had an option to give yes.
Yes.
So I just said no. Or I would have said, my mind even said, yes, I'll think about it and I'll talk to you later. It was just get him off the phone.
It was a yes, go away.
There was, And when you speak to somebody who's got that old school of getting to yes and making you agree and so on, you'll know when you've had a conversation with them, because when you finish the conversation, you walk away, you are absolutely crystal clear that they don't care about where you're coming from, what your thinking process, your concerns, etc. They just wanted their goal. And you feel kind of strongly manipulated.
Yeah.
So what Chris Voss said, which I thought was amazing, is if we all agree that getting to an aggressive yes is not necessarily a good thing, well, why don't we rather get to an aggressive no? A clear, not aggressive no, but a clear no.
Yeah.
Because when you ask someone a question to which they respond no, you make them feel much more in control. They haven't committed anything. They're not now going to suddenly buy the warranty or anything else. They suddenly find their kind of place of safety. In a way, I think you're almost giving them a negotiating advantage. Okay, they know what they don't want. That's them. Cool. And similarly to with someone saying yes, a trigger red flag is when they say you're right. Because when they're saying you're right, they're making an observation on a fact that you've said, that you've stated, which you're kind of imposing on them. And the opposite of that is when they say the opposite, which is, what was it?
That's right.
That's right.
That's right. You're right is a red flag, and that's right means you've understood.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. So when someone internalizes it and says, nods, okay, yeah, you're right. Sorry, that's right. Then you've found where they are, where they are, where they're living, they're thinking, and that's when you connect, I think, hey? And that's the sense of that connection that you've got.
Well, I so love. I mean, there's a Richard Feynman rule for arguing, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who said, before you're allowed to argue with someone, you need to be able to repeat their argument or paraphrase their argument so well that they say, "Oh, I wish I'd said it like that." Right? Then you're allowed to argue, which is that same feeling of the basis for having that empathy and that connection, which allows you to discover new solutions that weren't there before, is that feeling, okay, this person, he may not agree with me, but they really understand what my opinion is and what my motivations are.
And taking it further, the feelings that you mentioned there, when you really understand their feelings, that was harder for me. I'm famously not sort of a touchy-feely sort of person, and I found it quite intimidating to hear what Chris Voss, when he talked about that horrible term, tactical empathy, and it's such an American term, but take it in the best possible light, which is immersing yourself in the other person's emotional situation. And the famous story he gives in his book is he's called in to talk to these hostage takers. They've locked themselves in a flat, an apartment, not answering the door. They've got guns, they've got hostages, the whole deal. So you can't burst the door. So he stood at the door and he spoke to them and he said, "I know you must be feeling really
like this,
scared."
Playing that.
Yeah. And all he did was talk to the door for, I think, 5 hours.
Yeah, there was a long time of talking to the door.
Or he said,
any response?
"You must be feeling very helpless."
Yeah.
I can only imagine what I would be like.
Late night DJ voice.
And halfway through the sentence, in his 5th hour, they opened the door and they gave up.
Yeah.
And he said, "Why did you give up?" I said, "Well, we realized that you weren't going to come to the door shooting us. You were kind of understanding where we're coming from."
Yeah.
And to me, that's amazing, because the conventional high water, low water mark in that negotiation was, how much do you give them to come through the door? They didn't want what we thought we need to give them. They actually wanted something completely different. Just to be heard, I suppose.
Yeah, and that understanding was enough. And if you, I mean, obviously, we both have this slight aversion to the combination of the word tactical and empathy. But this concept of working hard to understand the other side, can you think of examples that have been, it's been really helpful to you, putting you on the spot a little bit there?
I'm trying to think ones that I can sort of describe coherently. I think it's probably, as I mentioned, and I'm not being humble or I really don't have a very strong emotional EQ. That's the connection. So I miss, when other people are in a lot of stress, I miss that very often, which makes me very strong in certain negotiating environments, very bad in others, like with my children, for example. Or
one of the most important negotiations, also one that's nearly impossible to win. So
yeah, exactly, yeah. And I'm looking to win, but I'm also not looking to make enemies. But I think with employees, actually, the level at which I'm, I suppose, exposed to personal stress that I can't manage in certain scenarios is very different to some other people. And I had to really appreciate what someone is going through when they get, for example, a deadline, which is going to mean certain sacrifices, how they think compared to how I think about that. And it's very much driven because I'm the owner, I'm the entrepreneur, they're the employee, they're not paid to deal with what I have to deal with. And to explore that it's still a journey which I've only just started really, but I thought that was a highly relevant everyday example of understanding someone's emotional situation before you go and start making assumptions about how they can respond.
Yeah, that's really good. Look, I feel like this is the kind of book that we could discuss for hours. But are there specific tips that, I think a lot of people hate negotiating. I think maybe you weren't as averse to negotiating given your line of work, but you found this. So for people who try to avoid negotiations, or how does one get started? What would you advise?
So if you're a reader, I would say that there's and if you enjoy kind of action and intellectual action books, I just start there. It's a good read.
Yeah.
I'd say a third of the book is stories about actual hostage taking scenarios, and also a fair amount of historical background, all the mistakes they made and why they evolved this touchy-feely approach, which is bizarre for this, the FBI. And they start joking about the SWAT guys and what the SWAT guys do in some situations, which is really just pull the trigger. And how they used to be like So I would just read the book because it's just great fun. Then I think there are a couple of specific takeaways, I suppose, but then I think that the space to not have to argue was radically powerful for me. Even quite controversially, and I hope none of my clients will take this the wrong way, but even the point of not having to win every argument is actually fine. If you are fundamentally about finding the truth in every scenario, in other words, where everybody legitimately is in their negotiating position and whether or not there's overlap, then I thought this book is fantastic. So I strongly believe that, and actually we should come to the title of this book in a second, but I strongly believe that negotiations shouldn't even proceed if you aren't clear that there is overlap in terms of what is acceptable to you and the other party. And I think that you should get to the point of understanding that there is no overlap, if there isn't, as soon as possible. In my world, where I'm dealing with startups who only have a certain amount of financial oxygen, they can't, negotiate funding for 6 months because they're going to run out of money next month. I want to get to that position like right now. And I think that and then if you are negotiating goodwill, which I believe most people are, even in the hard-nosed VC world, which isn't actually that hard-nosed, I think that you can get to an honest position of relative negotiation power overlap quite quickly through genuine engagement, mature, calm engagement, which, by the way, I haven't always been able to do, having actually been an investment banker at one point.
You said you wanted to talk about the title, the next, just the difference. We haven't touched on that a little bit.
Yes, and it's
unpack that.
It's a question that you discussed before,
Yeah.
So his position is you should never compromise, which I thought was the most challenging thing. If you're considering the book starts off with a trial that he's in, not a trial, a test of Mr. Voss, I have your son, I'm going to shoot him in the head if you don't pay me $1 million. So I'm not sure how you don't compromise in that scenario. But that's a more emotionally driven one. What he really said is that if I take my situation, I want you asking for certain legal services, and I ask for a certain fee in response. And in response, in our negotiation, instead of exploring what we really want and the value and so on, what I say is, I tell you what, I'll give you 70% of my legal services and you can pay me 70% of your fee. In that instance, we've split the difference, right? And you haven't got what you want in terms of the quality legal services, and I haven't got what I want in terms of the cost. And he said, that's just lazy. So I love that concept, despite all the what does it mean, and how do you not compromise, and all this ambush, hostage taking. But I love the point of saying, if you are going to split the difference, it's typically because you're just being lazy. I'm not explaining to you what the real value is of my service, for example. Maybe you aren't explaining to me your options. Maybe we aren't working together to find, it's not a question of diluting my service, it's giving more specific solution. And I love the fact that challenges you to think and prepare much better engaged.
To think and prepare and to ask really good questions, to almost avoid getting into what I would call haggling with the 100, no 50, no 75. And his question that he loves, this, how am I supposed to do that? Right? That's just such a powerful question to, before you get into haggling, to understand, is there an area of overlap? Can you create that empathetic connection? I think that's so powerful.
In fact, those questions are probably a podcast on its own. What do you use as a term for them? It's a
calibrated
question, another term. But I love that, because like mirroring, it is mirroring in a sense. And it's making someone solve their own problem.
Yeah.
And I love that. How am I supposed to do that? Find $1 million, and then they start automatically.
So maybe we'll have a whole podcast series where we go through chapter by chapter. But no, I don't want to use up all our time without going through a little bit of what you are putting energy into at the moment. I did mention, I think you're a brilliant ecosystem builder for the South African venture capital ecosystem. You're involved in the SA Startup Act. One of the most exciting things I think you're involved in, from my perspective, is trying to open source standard investment contracts. So can you talk a little bit about the rationale, what you're doing there, and how it's going?
So the starting point is that our law firm of 11, it fluctuates between 10 and 15 people. All we do is we help tech startups or any sort of high growth entrepreneur, ambitious entrepreneur, go through the process of raising funds, growing internationally, and exiting. And we do all that all the time. So we raise fundings of between $1 million and 100 million rand. We help them to set up their international structures and to build value in dollars globally. And then we help them in their exits, which is their transaction process. And it's just an area I love. And the reason I went into it is because I was one day at one of the large law firms in the country one morning, 1 a.m. in the morning, asking myself why are you doing this? And I just didn't have an answer as to why I was helping one pharmaceutical company buy another pharmaceutical company. It just wasn't, resonating. So I went off my own and started working with these entrepreneurs and really enjoyed the journey and engaging much more closely as an advisor rather than as a lawyer being paid for their fees. And realizing that South Africa is the best country in the world for entrepreneurs, as far as I'm concerned, and so inspiring. It's so much more positive than the corporate world, but the critical part of it is the speed at which they would close these 3 transactions. So funding, international growth, and exits. Because the longer you spend during a transaction, the longer you spend in a period of time which you face the risks of something happening, which is going to derail the transaction, happens a tremendous amount. The fact that Trump increases tariffs on one product might affect your company and close down your transaction. So speed is really critical, and I naively think that we can make more as a law firm by doing many more deals. And I think the industry would far rather have many more entrepreneurs than fewer. And at the moment, it's very hard because typically what happens is an entrepreneur goes to a law firm, ours included, and says, I'm raising these funds, please will give me investment documents, and I'll eventually hand over a suite of documents which I've crafted beautifully from scratch. And the law firm on the other side, be it for the investor or whoever, will receive these, and they'll receive these beautifully crafted legal documents, which they'll have to read word for word, of course, because they've never seen them before.
Never seen them.
And this is more intense depending on how big and corporate the law firm is. That defines how big and corporate the documents are that you receive. And we would do transactions in 3, 4, 5, 6 months. This is all while this poor startup is, just trying to breathe. And then we started working for a few global funds about 7 or 8 years ago. And we started doing deals on their behalf into offshore jurisdictions. So we'd receive, for example, the American documents drafted by American lawyers, and the fund would say, please, will you do it? Because we're South African, we've got equivalent education, but we're much cheaper. So we'd get these documents, and we quickly realized that these are open source model documents that the other law firm has taken and just edited. And very obviously,
it's like track changes. These are the clauses we're doing differently.
You have to go and merge and compare them against the originals, but that's no problem. That takes 30 seconds. And then you end up negotiating the departures from the model documents. And we were closing deals in 3 weeks, sometimes 2 weeks, same size deals. And I said to myself, if America, for example, has this system, how much more do we not need it when we have 1% of the deals closing at 10 times the price, legal fees, reach the deals. So it took us years to convince the market. And finally, though, now we have the backing of the South African Venture Capital Association, expressly backed by the SA SME Fund, another amazing group called Endeavour. And they said, obviously, I don't know why we haven't done this before. And the idea there is that, there's some things lawyers should be charging for and they should not be charging, I think, for.
Not for the standard contract.
For templates. And it's sad news for us lawyers. But that also means there's a lot more exciting work, and it works at scale. But we're not going to get to scale if we're charging 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of work on one transaction, which should be closing in 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. Well, I think that's absolutely brilliant. It's a huge step forward for the venture capital ecosystem. No doubt you used all your negotiating skills there to get it over the line. But look, huge thank you for coming on the Nonfiction Book Club. It's been an absolutely brilliant discussion. So thank you so much.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, John.
Good, wonderful. Well, thank you for listening to the Nonfiction Book Club. And until next time, goodbye. A big thank you to our headline sponsor, Innate. Next time you're talking to your financial advisor, ask them what platform they're using to manage the administration of your investments. If they say Innate, you can take comfort knowing they're using technology to work smarter and serve you better. Visit innate.co.za to find out more. A reminder to sign up to our newsletter to always be the first to hear about book reviews, interviews, and to get book discounts on great books from our book partners' exclusive books.